by a minute or two.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. Jeanette, can you do the roll call, please?
Sure. Bensonville,
Here.
City of Chicago 39th Ward,
Here.
Des Plaines,
Here.
Elmhurst,
Here.
Harwood Heights,
Here.
Niles, Park Ridge,
Here.
River Grove, Schaumburg,
Here.
Schiller Park,
Here.
and Wooddale.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Great. Thank you all so much. So let's start with the approval of the April 22nd, 2021 Fly Quiet Committee meeting minutes. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved. Second.
Any discussion or comments on the minutes? Hearing none. Jeanette, can we do the roll?
Bensonville,
Yes.
City of Chicago 39th Ward,
Yes.
Des Plaines,
Yes, and I'll second the motion. We forgot to do that.
Elmhurst,
Yes.
Harwood Heights,
Yes.
Niles, Park Ridge,
Yes.
River Grove, Schaumburg,
Yes.
Schiller Park,
Yes.
and Wooddale. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Are there any ONCC member comments who'd like to speak before the committee digs in today?
This is Michelle House from the Village of Glenview. We had a comment.
Sure.
The Village of Glenview supports alternative B, which we feel fundamentally is fair and meets all of the committee's requirements for a Fly Quiet program. We would like to incorporate RNAV into the departures for 4L, which we feel would provide noise mitigation by directing aircrafts over the Forest Preserve and Tollway corridor. The time should be taken to study RNAV now rather than delaying for a future revision to the program. We feel alternative H relies too heavily on the diagonal runways and does not meet all objectives when considering the secondary configurations for consecutive impacts, and thus should not be considered further. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any other ONCC member comments this morning?
Yes, Madam Chair, this is Frank Ikas from the 41st Ward. In these upcoming discussions and ultimate votes, I would implore all members to consider a few things, that the planes do not stick, especially on departure, the planes do not adhere to the runway direction when they're taking off, and consider that they're deviating up to 90 degrees and more. So when you're voting, don't vote just based on what direction the runway is heading. The planes are going to go where the planes need to go. So consider that. Consider also what former Chair Nunzio said, that this should not be parochial. It's not us against them. It's not us against the city. It's not us against the airport. It's us for us. So we should strive to and endeavor to get something that that's going to help all of us sometime, not none of us, or not, just one community. And I would encourage everyone to go down that path. And I would ask that the CDA in the future be more forthcoming with the information they give us. Speak directly to us. If you're going to show something that shows a contour, be accurate and tell us that's not where the planes are going to be. That's just a drawing. If people take the time to call 311 and file a noise complaint, do something to follow up on it. Don't just ignore the people. We've had hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of noise complaints, and the CDA has not followed up on any of them.
Okay.
If this,
let's keep this with Fly Quiet. I think that's the noise complaints are typically handled in tech committees. So did you have additional comments on Fly Quiet this morning?
no, that's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right. Any other ONCC members who wanted to speak this morning? Okay, so before we dig into review of the alternative B requested modifications. I did just want to ask for your grace today as I run this meeting, and also just let you know of how I intend to run today's meeting. So today we're going to focus on specific elements of alternatives B, and if we get to it, H. The idea is that we'll review, discuss, and start to take action on the specific feedback that we've received both from this committee's members as well as ONCC members at large. In order to facilitate this discussion, I've asked Landerman Brown to break up the discussion into specific areas where feedback was provided. I think it's going to make it easier for us to move forward in these discussions if we start focusing on specific elements. My intention is to use the same format as when we reviewed the alternatives. So Ryan's going to provide us an overview of the feedback received on a specific element. And then I'm going to go around the room to each member and ask for your comments on that specific topic. If any committee member wishes to defer their time to a non-voting member, you can indicate that, but we're going to put that time to the end instead of having multiple members defer. You know, Fair, SOC and JDA and Ron will have an opportunity to then speak at the end should a member choose to defer their time. We'll then complete a second round of discussion and then hopefully be in a position to take action on that item. Our goal is to get through as many items as possible in our 90 minutes without rushing the discussion. And then we'll just continue moving down the agenda at our June meeting, which I just quick plug, it is intended to be in person. So make note of that, allow yourself some travel time. And then a last heads up that for some of these discussion items, it is my intention to change the order in which members are called on, particularly as it relates to runway departure headings. I'd like to give the communities who are most impacted by a particular runway heading an opportunity to speak first so the other members can consider that feedback before they provide comments. So I'm going to keep you all on your toes a little bit today. We're going to shake up the order a little bit. And if there's any questions or issues, just shoot me a comment during the meeting. But with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ryan.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Chairwoman. We're going to pull up the slides here. Hopefully everyone can see them clearly. I'm going to start off just the usual review of where we are in the process. Again, we've been meeting for several years now, and we've done a lot of work to date. We have completed development and approval of our first draft of alternatives, and we are currently reviewing the two alternatives that have been advanced for further refinement, alternatives B and H at this point. And as Chairwoman mentioned, we are going to continue in this process until we emerge with a preferred alternative, whatever that may be. And I did develop kind of a graphic here to help illustrate what Chairwoman Robles was speaking to as far as the process for this morning. And so in kind of thinking through the best path forward, I was looking at it in kind of a roadmap, if you will, and we have to make several steps along the way. We have established, the committee has established their goals, developed the specific criteria that we are developing these alternatives to. There was a consideration of RNAV, and we have reached the point where we have two alternatives that contain at least the general concepts and components that seem to be most favorable. And so at this point, we are going to really focus on specific components of each alternative, and we are not going to move forward into other components until we really get comfortable and lock down decisions with each one. So we're going to start with primary configurations, specifically looking at the schedule of the configurations, not necessarily swapping. We haven't gotten any comments about swapping out primary configurations for new configurations, but looking at scheduling them in the alternatives. Once we've made a decision or at least come to some agreement as to what that should look like. If you'll please, everyone, if you mute yourself, please, that'd be appreciated. Unless unless you're a committee member who
Attachments, right.
has a question.
And what?
They all have attachments
Yeah.
with the work orders.
Linda's iPad, can you please mute
Figuring all
yourself?
those out, why am I bringing them to you in a green folder? What was that?
Okay, so primary configurations, once we get through that step, we'll move on to primary headings. And we're going to step through each individual departure runway end and look at all of the runway headings that we have today. And when I say, I'm going to be calling them approved headings, meaning these are the headings that nobody said no to per se, but we do have headings or suggested changes. And we're going to walk through each departure runway and the requested changes for each vector heading that we have for those runways and have a discussion. We're going to go through each of the runway ends that we have requests for modifications for. And then if we get to a point where we're comfortable with all of the runway ends and vector headings, then we'll move on to considering secondary configurations. And the secondary configurations, I mean those configurations that are paired with our primary configurations, so that if the wind conditions or weather conditions are not favorable to use our primary configuration, those would be the alternate configurations. So we have had a lot of some feedback on those configurations and possibly changing out some of the configurations as they are currently listed in each alternative. And so that section would be the opportunity to have that discussion. Once we finish that discussion, we'll move on to what is referred to as long runways. So as we move forward through the development of IFQ with the tests and the actual IFQ implementation, it was apparent that a long runway, at least with the airfield that was existing at the time, was needed with some of our configurations, especially the crosswind configurations. Not all of 100% of the aircraft are able to use some of our shorter runways. And so when we have a configuration that utilizes two of the shorter runways, we're going to have at least one long runway assigned so that if there is an operational need, aircraft and air traffic will have that flexibility. And so if there's any discussions about what that long runway is or how it should be used, that would be tabled for this kind of step 4 here. Now, as we're moving down the road and we get through past step 4, we kind of hit a crossroad. And this is the opportunity that we're not going to keep driving and just advance kind of to the finish line. This is the point where we're going to see where we're at. We're going to check our map. We're going to take a look back and make sure that we've got everything we need. I know when I leave in the morning and I think I've got everything, the kids are all packed in the car, somebody forgot something or somebody said, oh, you know, Dad, I need my book for today. So we'll look back and say, hey, do all these things make sense now in an overall picture? And if they don't, we have an opportunity to turn around and revisit any one of these items and make further revisions until the committee is comfortable with the overall package. Then once we have all these pieces, the committee has consensus that, you know, this is the best that we think we can get it. Then we'll advance into some of the procedural and implementation topics that we'll need to discuss so that we can have this a fully developed plan to submit to CDA for their packaging for FAA approval. So that is our goal for this process starting today. As Chairwoman mentioned, I highly doubt we're going to get through the entire agenda today. So this will probably take up several meetings, but this is, I think we all agree, is the most efficient way to move forward and get us to that finish line.
Ryan, well, real quick, without being pedantic, can we go back a slide?
Of course.
Are we going to need to have a discussion on secondary headings, secondary configuration headings? Is that like a 3.5?
So we can have that discussion. So right now, our headings, we are assuming that they remain the same. Each configuration, depending on the alternative, has a vector heading assigned to it. It may have 2 vector headings assigned to it. The headings would be primary headings, meaning would be the first and second heading would be in number 2. So any additional heading changes that would be for secondary configurations has not been really discussed, and I guess we can discuss that in number 3.
I don't think we need to. I'm okay. I just want to make sure everyone's okay with that and on the same page, that we're just the secondary configuration, we'll just use the primary heading of it.
Correct. That
Okay,
is
I'm
our-
fine with it.
Yeah, I
Yes.
think that's a good point, because we had that conversation about between sort of B and H. And the thing about primary departure headings is that hopefully they will have application kind of across the board. Obviously, if we get to the end of Ryan's roadmap and we decide maybe that didn't work out the way we intended, we can certainly revisit it. But we will be trying to take as much from kind of our initial conversations and not necessarily have to repeat discussions if we think they're applicable to both alternatives B and H.
Yes, and I think that'll make the discussion once we get to H much smoother, because we've talked through a lot of those topics and made decisions that would flow into that discussion. Okay,
Okay, let's go on.
so we'll begin with alternative B and the primary configurations. And so this is, you should all be very familiar with at this point. This is alternative B. I'm calling it as currently approved, meaning this is the alternative that was voted to advance for further refinement. So this represents no changes from that vote to advance. Since that time, we've had a lot of discussions about the components of alternative B. We've had a lot of discussion and recommendations about tweaking, whether it be headings or configurations. And so we are going to focus on really the first and second columns, the week and the configuration. And the this specific recommendation has been almost across the board. I think everyone we've talked to has agreed that this is a good idea. And the request is that we swap weeks 4 and 5, configurations O and P, in the schedule. So this doesn't represent any new configurations being inserted. It doesn't change any runways that are being used, but it does swap their location in the schedule. And the reason for this, and I just want to draw your attention back to the original Flight Quiet 21 criteria that this committee voted to approve back in November of 2018. One of criterion number 5 was to avoid consecutive impacts. And it specifically states to minimize the potential for impacting areas with the same type of arrivals or departures 2 periods in a row. So this next page illustrates how that is. And so what we're looking at here is alternative B with those weeks 4 and 5 switched. So instead of week 3 configuration L, then going into week 4 configuration P, we've switched it so that it is now O. And the rationale behind this is that you'll see in week 3, configuration L is a crosswind configuration, east flow crosswind configuration, and the identified designated long runway is 227 left, 9 right. And the thought was if we kept configuration P in week 4, that has the same designated long runway. And the concern that was articulated was that when we're in week 3 configuration L, we're all aware that during crosswind weeks, there is a need for a long runway. And in order to avoid having that same long runway being back-to-back weeks, it was better served to swap weeks 4 and 5 so that the week 4 long runway was on the south airfield being 10 left, 28 right. And so this week 4 and 5 is the swap with O and P, and then it is duplicated on the following week in weeks 10 and 11. And so at this point, I would like the committee to give their thoughts and discuss, is this what the committee would like to see as a change to alternative B?
Okay, thank you, Ryan. So Ben Samil, you get to go first on this one. I am going to try and keep everyone to 3 minutes for your comments. If you'd like to keep it less, that would be great as well, so we can keep moving.
Bensonville has no problem with this change. Seems reasonable.
All right, thanks, Evan, for being brief. Ward 39.
Same here. Agree with Evan on that. No problem.
Great. Displays?
We're good with this change.
Okay. Elmhurst?
Yes, I think it's a positive change. We support it.
Harwood Heights?
Yes, we've talked about it before, and we're in agreement as well as Norwich too.
Okay. I don't believe Niles is on the call. Don't think Joe's joined us. Park Ridge?
Yes, good morning, Karen. We have no problem with the proposed change in the within the scope of how the change is intended on those particular weeks.
Great, thank you. River Grove, don't think Dennis is with us this morning. Schiller Park? Okay.
I'm
Right
sorry,
there.
I forgot to unmute. Schiller Park has no problems with the changes.
Great. Wooddale?
No problem.
Okay, and I'm also in support of these changes. With that, I will give any of the members an opportunity to discuss further. And if not, I would look for one of our members to make a motion to direct this change to the primary configurations.
Karen, I would like to invite any non-voting member of Fly Quiet to provide color.
Thank you. We'll start with Fair.
Yeah, we think the week swap in the primary configurations is a good idea. We'll wait till we get to secondary configurations. That's where we think the issue is. But thank you for deferring, Evan.
Okay. JDA.
Yes, we are in full support of swapping weeks 4 and 5 and 10 and 11 to address the consecutive impacts. And I would just note in the previous configuration, it was a consecutive impact in week 3 of the alternative long runway with the primary runway in the proposed alternative week 4. So this cures that, and we greatly appreciate the committee's endorsement of that.
Great. And then Ron.
No comments. I think it's fine.
Okay, thank you. Is there a motion then from a member to support this change in the primary configurations?
Harwood Heights will make a motion to swap out weeks 4 and 5 and 10 and 11 and accept those changes for alternate B.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Schiller Park will second that.
Thank you. Jeanette, can we do well, is there any further discussion?
No.
Okay, hearing none. Jeanette, can we do a roll call, please?
Sure. Bentonville,
Yes.
City of Chicago 39th Ward,
Yes.
Des Plaines,
Yes.
Elmhurst,
Yes.
Harwood Heights,
Yes,
Niles is absent, Park Ridge,
Yes.
River Grove, Schaumburg,
Yes.
Schiller Park,
Yes.
and Wooddale.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, I think that was probably a good start and a good way to ease into it. So now we will move on to primary headings. I think probably a little more discussion on these.
Yes, and let me pull up those slide decks here.
Okay, and while Ryan does that, just forewarning, this is where you're all going to go out of order. So going to keep everyone engaged by changing things up on you.
Happy to continue go first, Karen.
What's that?
I'm happy to continue going first, but you want to change it up, that's your prerogative. Okay, hopefully everyone can see their screen here with the new alternative B as approved. So this now represents your new alternative B as currently modified with swapping those weeks 4 and 5 and 10, 11. And so now we're going to be talking about runway headings, primary configuration runway headings. And in the column you see with headings, we have vector headings, no RNAV, and there are 2 headings per configuration. They're identified as a 1 and a 2. And so the idea is in the first 6 weeks with our 6 configurations, we will use the first runway heading. And then the second 6 weeks, we will resume the 6 configurations with the second vector headings. We've had some feedback about the benefit of either having 1 heading versus 2. And we've also had a lot of comments about changing individual headings to different vector degree headings. So we're going to go through all of the recommended changes, and you see here on this slide, this is the summary of the recommended changes for all the headings that we've received to date. And each one is highlighted with a red box. And we're going to go through each one of these individually. Our suggestion is that we walk through the airport clockwise. And so we're going to start with the northeast quadrant, and we're going to focus on runway 4 left departures. And so what you see on your screen here is runway 4 left with 2 arrows. Each arrow represents the first vector heading for the first week that this runway, being a crosswind runway, comes up in the schedule, and the second vector heading represented by BH1 and BH2. Now these, as I've used the term in the past previously, these are what are currently approved, meaning that they are, nobody said no to these per se, but we do have suggestions on changing them. Some of the things we've added to these graphics are the red center line for the arrival runways. And so what you're seeing there was a request that it would be helpful to know what the arrival corridor would be and what weeks those would be used. And so that red line, you'll see 22 right arrivals, which is the reciprocal runway. And in weeks 6 and 12, that runway is scheduled for arrivals. And so this is, again, as approved. The other, what you're looking at in this map, just to remind you, this is a population density map, meaning that it's color coded by population, and the darker the blue, the more residential or population there is in that particular square. And so you'll see areas of, Park Ridge and Chicago with some darker populations, and the Des Plaines River with no blue at all. So moving forward, this next slide is the same runway, but now we are looking at the requested modifications. So we have 2 requests. We have a request to change the first vector heading for 4 left to a 015 degree heading, so a turn that's more to the north. And we have a request to change the second vector heading to due north, 360 degrees for the second vector heading in week 9. And so at this point, I'd like the committee to discuss whether or not each one of these changes is something they would like to see adopted for alternative B.
Okay, before we go through it, Evan's got his hand up. I don't know if
Yeah.
he's trying to go first again or.
No, this is more of a technical question. This is not regarding the specific headings. Ryan, can you review the takeoff procedure on this? So we have the heading, but how long are we going to, when are we going to get to that heading? And then how long are we going to stay on that heading?
Yeah, so the good question. The procedure as it is now is that this is a vector heading that will be assigned to the aircraft or the pilot by air traffic to make the turn when it is safe to do so. That is usually several hundred feet above the end of the runway threshold as it is departing for left. And it is a turn that is made in a way that is done safely. And the aircraft will turn to, let's say, 015 degrees and maintain that heading until the aircraft climbs to a specific altitude. In this case, we have not discussed yet that's the altitude of 3,000 feet, MSL, mean sea level, that is currently defined in your current flight quiet program. That will be a topic once we get through that roadmap and we're good with the changes. That will be one of the procedural topics that we'll talk about. Is there an opportunity to modify that? And if so, what would it be? And is that something that would affect anything else as far as the package? We can look back and see if there needs to be made any refinements. But that is the procedure: taking off, turning safely to the manually. It's not computer run like an RNAV, so it's not going to follow a direct GPS controlled route to the vector. It's going to be a turn made by the aircraft and the pilot to 015 degrees up to 3,000 feet above sea level.
Hi, Dan.
And it also, and I apologize for interrupting, I want to take the opportunity to also clarify the graphic, the arrows. They are purely meant to be just a representation of that heading. It is not meant to be a representation of here's where all the aircraft are going to be exactly when they make that turn and fly over that area. It is only meant to help the discussion when looking at these headings and these turns. It is not meant to represent actual flight paths.
Okay, thank you. Dan, did you have a kind of a technical question?
Sorry, clicked the wrong button.
I'm like, I lost Dan.
Just a quick question for clarification. My math is rusty in the morning. Was that 360-degree heading a 40-degree turn?
No, so that's a 20.
So I'm getting 25 with the 15.
So so you're going back to 0, right? So it's a 39. Actually, my math is not going too well here. So it is not a 40-degree heading.
Ryan, it's Aaron. So is the departure intended on 4, so it's 40 degrees? So if we're starting at 40 degrees and we go due north, isn't that 40-degree difference?
I guess that would be a 40-degree heading, which would exceed our 25-degree threshold.
Dan, does that help?
I just wanted to clarify before we got further in the discussion.
Right. So one of the things that the committee needs to consider is that even if this was advisable, it may not be feasible given the limitations of the turns of the aircraft.
Okay.
If I could just follow up briefly though, since that has a lighter fleet mix typically on those diagonals, is there any FAA consideration? Because 22 left does 40-degree turns currently. So is it worth, I guess I'd ask the committee, asking the FAA if this is feasible, because they typically aren't the wide body.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Oh, Ron.
Yeah, that is a fundamental question. I mean, yes, Dan, it is typically a lighter fleet mix, but what we're trying to accomplish here is trying to put some of the larger aircraft on this, which goes back to my perennial effort and concern.
Okay, we're gonna let Ron talk and then we're gonna start going through the committee members. So Ron.
Thanks. Just a quick question for Ryan. It might be helpful to committee members as you're going through these and the discussions you've had with the people that made these recommendations. Can you give some explanation as to the thought process for why they are requesting the change to these? Or is it trying to hit a certain land use? Are they trying to avoid things? It just might help to get some background for people to think about.
So and if anyone who actually made these recommendations want to speak further to it in the discussion, but to clarify, but our understanding was that these two specific headings were suggested so that they can better use the 294 and Des Plaines River corridor going to the north. And so the thought is, as those planes depart and head on those vector headings, they would overfly those more compatible land use areas as you go out further north than this picture depicts. So you'll see 294 and kind of that Des Plaines River corridor being being used. And it also what the thought was to not overlap that 22 right arrival corridor as well, to avoid duplicate overflights over certain areas that maybe get overflights from arrivals.
I think that's a good point. If any of our members provided comments, I think when you have an opportunity to speak, it would be very helpful if you could indicate that and provide us your thought process for requesting those changes so the committee members can take that into consideration. Alderman Dunn, did you have a clarification question for Ryan?
I did. So I know the 360 degree is 40 degrees off the departure line, and that tends to be a little bit higher. But we've seen that achieved on the diagonals on a regular basis. So I think if we move forward with the 40 degree, and then the other one would be a 25 degree heading as the recommended departure paths on different weeks. That's still a guideline though. If a larger plane cannot make the 40 degree turn, I assume it would be acceptable if they did something less, perhaps 20 degrees, because they're not capable of doing that. So that's just a technical question. That these are guidelines for departures. And I think the pilots generally follow them, but if they have a larger aircraft.
Yeah, I think as I understand it, they would still try to achieve that heading. It would just likely take those planes longer to.
Yeah, so correct. So some aircrafts, as we've discussed in the past, are capable, maybe lighter and faster, and maybe capable of achieving that heading sooner than some of the larger, heavier aircraft.
Okay, Ernie, I see your hand up, but you're second on my list. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna jump in. Everyone's gonna have the first round to ask clarifying questions, provide feedback, the second round to clarify anything else. And then if we need further discussion, we'll certainly facilitate that. So with that, we're gonna jump in with Des Plaines going first. So Alderman?
Yes, I'm obviously this impacts Des Plaines enormously. So my first reaction is on this, speaking the Des Plaines as a whole, as an entity, that this will, instead of having a piece of Des Plaines overflown, we'll have the entire city overflown, because it just basically goes up to the entire city. So that's a change. I'm a little bit puzzled by the fact that it's following the contour of the river and the expressway, because it seems in this thing it doesn't do that until outside the picture, whereas the other one goes quickly over to the highway and the forest preserve, and then could make a turn up in that direction. So the fact that it doesn't make a turn doesn't mean it couldn't make a turn. So I'm a little puzzled by that rationale. I also note that there's a high density population on the 15 degrees area. I know the area that it's overflying, so that's a consideration. There is some benefit, obviously, to changing off, because the arrival vector obviously hits some people and this hits different people, so it's sharing the load. So that is some kind of advantage that could be accrued there. So that's kind of how I'm looking at it. It changes some of the impacts. Traditionally, my ward is at the bottom, over at the bottom towards Higgins. And obviously it's an improvement for my ward, because it will take some of the flights out to the other wards that haven't been impacted. but I don't represent my ward here. I represent the city of Des Plaines. It would be a bit bigger impact for the city of Des Plaines. So, you know, it's got its pluses and its minuses, I would say. Certainly spreads the burden out. That means the phone calls will come from the whole city rather than just from my ward. That will, you know, kind of push the load outward. Beyond that, that's what I would say on it. So I'm kind of a little bit neutral on it to slightly against it. So I guess that's kind of where I'm coming on those particular vector headings.
Okay, thank you. Park Ridge, you're next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, everyone. The positive first, we would concur in dealing with the northeast quadrant of eliminating the runway heading departure of a 040 or even a 039. While we don't have any dark blue areas immediately on this slide, you do with those headings. Thank you, Ryan. You do with that 039 heading, put it over a majority of population area in the northeast quadrant. The second is a clarifying question. I guess back to you, Ryan. I just want to make sure that we understand from the time of rotation of that aircraft off of the departure runway, the local controller would have given him one of these headings, whichever one we're talking about here, whether it's the 360 or all the way to the 039. And that's the heading that aircraft is expected to maintain until reaching 3,000 feet, at which point that aircraft would then make its way to the first waypoint. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, so that is correct. Once it reaches 3,000 feet, they'll be given further direction instructions from air traffic control that will usually be a waypoint that is more in line with their destination rather than any noise abatement procedure. So once the aircraft reaches 3,000 feet, and we see this in our when we review our flight quiet reports and the track maps, that they'll maintain that preferential flight path to 3,000 feet, and then they'll make a turn. And so you'll see dispersions depending on where that aircraft is going for its final destination.
Great, thank you. And that then brings up my point, and this is a concern I have. The depiction that we have, we're making the assumption here that every aircraft departs the runway at the threshold, at the departure threshold, at the absolute, so to speak, end of the runway. I think we know that larger aircrafts may take full length. Smaller aircraft may be leaving somewhere along the way, and I'm wondering how that impacts the departure heading. I realize we have a very wide arrow here in cone, but you know.
Yeah.
If somebody departs, 2,000 feet, or 6,000 feet down the runway as compared to going full length, and then is making these turns, how does that impact the overflight of that area?
Yeah, and again, the good point. The arrows again are not meant to represent the actual flight locations, and we see, looking back at those flight quiet reports and other material that we've looked at, when actual flight locations, there's a lot of variability when the aircraft is off the ground on the runway, depending on the performance characteristics of that specific aircraft and when they're able to make that turn. Each airline and the FAA have set safety standards as to when the aircraft can make a turn safely based on how far off it is above the ground to avoid any obstacles. But some aircraft are able to get up and get to a safe altitude to make a turn before the end of the runway. And usually those are some of the smaller, more high performance aircraft that we have in the fleet mix.
Great, thank you. Chair, just to summarize, from our standpoint, we would concur with the elimination of a runway or 039 heading on departure in favor of some of the others. Concur with Alderman Chester of concern about something such as a due north heading, and that would be our concern is somewhere in between that. And if there's any time left, I would defer it to Mr. Dwyer from FAIR.
All right, thank you. So we'll move on to Chicago Ward 39.
Yes, and we in general principles are slammed by arrivals here where we are, and anything that gives relief to those communities that are just really impacted by the arrival corridors is good. And I think the modifications do that. They kind of give relief to the people slammed by arrivals, and it also disperses the effects of noise more evenly. So I think we concur with either one as far as just avoiding the 39-degree heading and either modifying, maybe not going all the way to 360, but maybe somewhere in between. So I think that's where we would stand on that one.
Great, thank you. Harwood Heights, you're next, and I saw your hand up there.
Yes, thank you. Looking at week 3 at 15 degrees and week 3 at 39 degrees, we're trying to avoid the most populated area. And it seems like week 3 at 15 degrees, it totally is over the most populated areas at the 15 degrees. At the 39 degrees, to me, it seems like it avoids that most populated area. See? So, and week 9 at 14, you're hitting that populated area again, where is if you did the 360, it appears to me that you're trying to avoid that populated area, if it's feasible, to go with the 360 and the 39 degrees. Does that make sense? I'm just looking at those 3 blocks of heavily populated areas to the north. And if we stuck with a 360 and a 39, that would avoid it to the best, the best possible way.
Okay, thank you. Schiller Park, you're next.
Thanks, Karen. I see a problem for the new formation. Larger planes, when they're taking off, and they can make that hard left. From what I understand, the harder to the left or the right turn, the more noise they're producing. And so instead of going straight out, you can make them turn, and it's gonna create more noise for that population there. I get going over 294 is a great idea. This doesn't affect Schiller Park directly, other than the planes who cannot use that short runway will be flying over Schiller Park, Bentonville, or Northside Chicago because they need a longer runway. So Schiller Park will be affected by the short runways because of the larger planes. But again, maybe say for Ryan, the harder to turn, the more noise the aircraft makes. Is that true?
Well, yeah, that's something we touched on briefly some time ago when we looked at, some of these, whether it be intersection departures or departing turns, whether or not there is a difference in noise. And there is a difference. However, it's a very negligible amount, and it is something that you may or may not be able, if you're standing on the ground, you may or may not be able to actually tell a difference. Visually, you'd probably be able to tell, but audibly, there is a difference, but I don't think everyone would be able to really experience a major difference between let's say a 20-degree turn versus a 25-degree turn.
Would that also be because of the larger aircraft taking longer time to make their turn? Would that affect more people?
Well, yeah, so it would just be not necessarily more. Again, it depends on where the turn is made and the type of turn. And there will be, depending on the location, how many people that is, it's hard to say. And so it's not necessarily the sharper the turn, more people will impact noise. There's a lot of variables that would go into that.
Okay, I kind of understand, but again, those runways don't affect.
Yeah, to your point, yes, the more turn there is, the more potential there is for increased noise. There's a potential.
I'm just trying to bring it up for all the people who live out there in that area. Okay, thank you, Karen.
Thank you. Elmhurst?
Yes, thanks, Madam Chair. I think the change to getting off that departure path at the 039 heading is a positive move. Those people, although tending to be not as densely populated, getting hit with all activity on that runway is not a fair distribution in this quadrant. So I think this is a plus. I would support it. I think that if we were to narrow down from 2 departure paths to 1, the one that appears to be impacting less people with a less dense population at the 015 might be the better alternative. Plus the comments on the turning radius and additional noise also. But I think having these 2 headings is good, and so we're okay with that.
Great, thank you. Bensonville?
I think Mayor Deserny did a great job explaining my position, and I think we share the same position. I'm always very cautious about using population density maps to make these decisions. I think it's a little dangerous. If we start making all of our decisions based on population maps, then we will only be putting airplanes over the suburbs, as the city of Chicago is a magnitude of difference more dense than the suburbs. So I'm always cautious about making those decisions. I don't really like the dispersion that the 360 degree heading gets. I'm also not too concerned about that 039 heading over the arrival lane. It's not a consecutive impact. So I think we actually get better dispersion than the original. I don't think I'll be supporting this change. Thank you.
Thank you. Wooddale?
I've got nothing specific to talk about with this item. For all my time allotted today, I would just defer to JDA if they had something specific they'd like to add to anything.
Okay, thank you. I will jump in before we move to our non-voting partners. So I did make a comment that I had concerns about a departure heading that mirrored the arrival heading. I will say I think that 360 degrees is probably a steeper turn than I'm comfortable with, and I'm wondering if there's a happy medium between maybe, you know, keeping the 14 degree and then something that's off-centered, so not quite the 039, but somewhere between that 14 and 039 would be my comments today.
Madam Chair, I have a question, a thing that I need to bring up, if I could.
Okay, so let me get to our non-voting members, and then you will be next and have another 3 minutes to speak. So thank you. Fair, you can go first.
Yeah, I think on the 360 degree heading, I would think we'd have some data from IFQ on that 40 degree turn off of 22L, just to see how the heavy aircraft performed. And maybe also then with some feedback from the FAA, we could at least come to a database decision on what's feasible there. And then the second comment brought up by many is overlapping that arrival stream. And one thing we have to keep in mind, and I appreciate that it's noted here, each of those arrival streams repeats twice in a 12-week, and we're talking about then single departure headings. And all the historical data from our tests and IFQ shows that we get 2 arrivals for every departure.
Yeah.
And for this configuration in particular, we're also typically in west flow with 22-hour arrivals. The departures we're showing here for configurations L or configuration L is the lowest performing configuration. So airfield balance plays in here as well as to how significant an impact a 0 degree or runway heading would make. Thank you.
Thank you. JDA.
Thank you. So the one issue that we would try to bring into everybody's mind is when we're looking at headings, I think, you know, there since 2005, Aaron and company have been insulating homes to attempt to achieve compatible land use for the OMP changes. These headings are going to be critical to honoring those changes, drastic changes to the headings in the opposite direction of where we have implemented sound insulation over the past 20 years is going to make a big difference there. And I think is somewhat disingenuous to the intent of the sound insulation program for those newly impacted citizens. So I just want to give that as a heads up. We put that in our report, that sound insulation map, because we have, Chicago's done an excellent job of striving to achieve some compatible land use in very difficult situations. And we just need to be cognizant of that as we make these changes. We have modeled the noise change on large aircraft on the more significant headings, and that would be a 25-degree heading in compared to a runway heading. The change is significant. It's 20% growth in that contour width, which we consider significant. The other loss of climb rate that we have calculated is 20 additional seconds below that 3,000 MSL. So the aircraft is going to be limited to turning and if you will, dispersing that noise, which we think the turn at the 3,000 MSL point is a good thing for noise dispersion, because then we get a drastic, when you watch web track, you see these aircraft just going towards their next leg of their destination flight procedure, and it disperses nicely. So the sooner we can get them up to that point and get them moving towards where they want to go, the quicker it gets them up and out of that noise cone, if you will, of the lower elevations having a bigger impact on the ground.
Okay. Thank you. Ron?
The only comment I would make is the proposed changes to me look like it concentrates the departures over a particular area more. When you look at the two arrows that are on the screen now, there's no daylight between those two arrows. If you look at the original one that was proposed out there, you can see where the arrows actually diverge from each other, which spreads it out more. So I would think the original would be better for spreading out the noise versus the proposal.
Thank you. We'll go back to displays now.
Yeah, I just wanted to make an additional comment because I feel compelled to do so. Both the 14-degree and the 15-degree headings, you see that the densely populated areas that the middle of the thing goes through. I just want to make people aware that those densely populated areas are almost entirely Hispanic, and that's why there's the density there. So I don't want to be accused of targeting them. So I just bring that up as a point of reference for people.
Thank you. I think that's helpful to know. Park Ridge.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a question. While we're trying to achieve two departure heading configurations off each one of these paths, is it set in stone that we have to do that? I mean, could we just say, in this particular situation, the way 4 left is configured, if we're opposed to a runway heading departure configuration and we're opposed to the 360, and as Ron mentioned, now we might have a bunch of overlap, could we just decide that one departure heading is the way that this particular runway 4 left has to operate?
Yes, we can absolutely do that. And I think that is a change that if we make that as part of this discussion, it's something that we would revisit then at the end of Ryan's roadmap to make sure we understand how that might impact those primary and secondary configurations. But certainly if the committee feels like we don't think 2 departure headings serves us with particular runways, that is absolutely a decision we can make.
And thank you, Madam Chair. And then as a follow-up to that, and in respect to Glenview's concern of an RNAV departure, which I know we've had discussions of, and Ryan, I know you can't draw the exact map because obviously there's a lot of work that goes into the RNAV. Of these particular vector departure headings, any idea of what one would be anywhere close to what might be drawn for an RNAV? I realize I'm stretching here, but can you offer any insight?
I hesitate, but if the committee wants to compare those, we can. I would say that it, as I spoke to before, that original RNAV discussion did have that procedure following along that 294 corridor as best it could. And so I hesitate to say which one of these two off the cuff is closest to that, that one we talked about. But if that's something the committee wants to compare, we're happy to provide that information.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll defer any further time on this round to the representative from FAIR.
Great, thank you. Chicago Ward 39.
No further comments.
Okay, thank you. Harwood Heights.
No further comments, but the comment about possibly using one heading for week 3 and week 9, if it eliminates population, I mean, that would be something to consider later on.
Okay, thank you. Schiller Park.
No comments other than to don't know if I'm in favor of one heading, because you're concentrating into same people all the time and you're not dispersing anything. I like the original one we had where there is light between the two arrows. It gives some relief once through other people. Thank you.
Thank you. Elmhurst.
I don't have any further comments.
Thank you. Bensonville.
Yeah, I support just maybe even reworking this entirely and sending these headings back to the drawing board. It seems to me that everyone agrees that these aren't the right headings. Maybe there's something, as you mentioned, Karen, something in between. That said, between the two, I would support the original over the modified.
Thank you. Wooddale.
I have no comment.
Okay, thank you. I will weigh in. I actually like Evan's idea. I think that we've provided good feedback. I'm also not, I don't know that I love one heading, but I'm also not opposed to it if we feel like we're concentrating departures too much. With that, we'll go on to FAIR.
Thank you. Alderman Chester made a good comment that sort of pertains to environmental justice. And I guess what concerns us about using a map such as this is lower population density doesn't necessarily mean less consideration when we get to, or the FAA does their environmental justice review. So I think we have to be careful about just looking at the shading of this map for assigning departure headings. You really need to either treat everyone fairly in that you don't overlap anybody excessively, or we really have to dig further into environmental justice and figure out where the sensitive corridors are if we're going to use a map such as this. Thank you.
Thank you. JDA.
Yeah, I support the line of discussion of looking a little closer at this, because I think that proposed headings are both a mistake with those heavily populated areas. We seem to have gotten away from an idea early on we had here, which was to follow that transportation corridor with more of a dog leg, just as we do to the south. So there would be a turn there at the interstate corridor to have that path follow the interstate corridor. That is more consistent with the sound insulated homes on the early portion of that departure, and then follows maybe a quieter or a corridor that has transportation noise that helps drown this out. And we have found that useful in other areas around the country as we're dealing with RNAV and Metroplex.
Thank you. Ron?
Yeah, just to add something to what Cynthia and Ernie both have said. I mean, because the committee has already voted that they didn't really want to pursue RNAV at this point, but you can design a departure procedure, a vector procedure that would mirror or mimic what the RNAV would. So like what Cynthia said, you could go out to the highway and then do a dogleg turn up as a vector heading, and it would achieve very similar to what an RNAV, just not as narrow pencil thin of a line, but it would still get them in the same general vicinity.
Okay, thank you. So based on the discussion we've had thus far, I think at this point, it sounds like a motion would be appropriate to ask Landrum and Brown to take the feedback that they received today into consideration and bring back maybe some revised alternatives for the committee's consideration at our next meeting. But I'm certainly open to other motions if committee members are looking to do something else. So is there anyone who wants to make a motion for consideration?
Yes, Karen, I'd like to make that motion. This is very hard for me. This impacts my city a lot. And I'd like to see some more alternatives because I'm really kind of torn right now. So perhaps something new will come along that'll be a little bit easier for me to support. So I'd make that motion.
Okay, is there a
Second from Park Ridge.
Okay, thank you. And is there any discussion on those two motions?
Aaron,
Dan?
can you restate the motion?
So the motion would be to ask Landrum and Brown to take the feedback from today's discussion into consideration and revise the alternatives to present new departure headings for consideration at our next meeting. So Dan?
Yeah, I think what might be helpful in these areas where there's some sticking points on departure headings is, doesn't have to be on this graphic, but in some way show the difference in departure dispersion between a runway heading and a 25-degree heading. When we talk about the space between the arrows, we're not really considering that. So I think that would be helpful to the committee to understand that. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, not seeing any other committee members want to discuss this. Jeanette, can we get a roll call?
Bensonville,
Yes.
City of Chicago 39th Ward,
Yes.
Des Plaines,
Yes.
Elmhurst,
Yes.
Harwood Heights,
Agree, yes.
Park Ridge,
Yes.
River Grove, absent, Schaumburg,
Yes.
Schiller Park,
Yes.
and Wooddale.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, recognizing that we have about 20 minutes left in the meeting, what I'd like to do is go ahead and jump into our next runway departure heading. And recognizing that we might only be able to get through kind of one round of comments, I will try and get through everyone on the list at least once so we can provide some initial feedback. And so we can, you know, again, try to move things forward as much as possible. So, and again, the order is changing. So Ryan, go ahead.
Yeah, so next runway is runway 9 right, departure vector headings. As same as before, the 2 vector headings that you see are the 2 vector headings that were originally assigned in alternative B. During week 5, the configuration utilizing 9 right would utilize a 080 degree heading first, and then the second iteration in week 11 would utilize a further offset to the north at 065 degrees, being vector heading 2. And we have the runway corridor, arrival corridor being runway 27 center, that would be utilized in weeks 1 and 7. The modification that we have is a change to that second vector heading. So the first vector heading, no one gave us any specific changes to that, but we did have a request to change vector heading 2 to a 070 degree heading. And I believe part of the rationale behind that was that it was a less of a turn, going back to that keeping the thought of keeping the turns not as, I hesitate to use the word drastic, but a more degree turn off of that runway center line, this being 25 degrees versus a 7-degree, 20-degree turn.
Thank you. Chicago Ward 39, you get to go first.
No, we like the original proposal. It gives relief again to the people hit by the arrivals and also disperses the noise in a better, more equitable way. So we like the way it is as approved.
Okay, thank you very much. Schiller Park?
I also like the way because it gives a relief. It separates the arrows, and otherwise you're going to an RNAV and you're going to pound the people. So I like it just like it is.
Okay, thank you. Harwood Heights? Oh, Mary, you muted?
Yeah, okay, I'm sorry. I like it as is, but I just had a question. At what point would you be at 3,000 feet? Would that be at Milwaukee, Caldwell? Where do you think that would line
Yeah,
up?
and that's, not depicted on these graphics. And again, that's a variable that's hard to give you a specific location because that depends on the type of aircraft, the performance of the aircraft, the weather, all sorts of variables that are hard to say. We do have a general idea, and we have kind of shown graphics in the past, especially when we were doing tests 1, 2, and 3 in IFQ. Some people, took issue with some of the boxes we were using, trying to represent as best we can what we thought would be the general location of where these flights would concentrate. But that being said, that's something we can, try and help describe further. But at this point, it's a variable that's very hard to define exactly when they'll hit that 3,000 feet. We can look at historic tracks off of our existing preferential flight paths, showing, for instance, the 28 right departure, where those on average, where the 3,000 feet is met by the aircraft, and try to, describe that for some of these vector headings. But it's hard, I guess, long answer is it's very hard to say at this point whether that will be a Milwaukee Avenue, Caldwell, or further east.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
Okay, Park Ridge?
When it comes to this particular topic, Madam Chair, on these departure headings, it would appear from Park Ridge's standpoint in Northeast Quadrant that we're doing a little rearranging of the deck chairs on the Titanic. So we're indifferent as to the actual headings, saying as a portion of Park Ridge in the Northeast Quadrant. I guess if we had to choose, we'd want to disperse them as wide as possible with the different weeks, but it would appear that it's the splitting of hairs, so somewhat indifferent to this.
All right, thank you, Park Ridge. Displays?
Well, the change is slightly beneficial to displays, but it isn't a great difference. I don't think either one is going to impact much. The areas of displays where the impact is commercialized anyway. So it's where the casino is, and then there's a development there. That's where the FAA is located and stuff like that. So it's kind of indifferent to me. If I was forced to choose, then I would go for the change.
Okay, thank you. Elmhurst?
I think the original departure plan shown right there takes more advantage of trying to move away from the arrival path, and as Dan from FAIR mentioned, arrivals outnumber departures 2 to 1. So I think it's really important that we do that for mitigation of nighttime noise. So I prefer this. If we drop to 1 departure heading, that 60 degree, I think accomplishes that goal, or 65 degree accomplish that goal even better. That week 5 at 80 degrees is over. You can see it's a much more population density there. So yeah, I think we would prefer this one over the suggested alternative.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, Bensonville?
So we accepted when we started this process a 25-degree departure heading maximum, which is what this original is. A 65 degrees, 25 off the runway. I don't know why we would change from that. If we accepted that as a tolerance, we should keep it as a tolerance, and we create better dispersion by having it at 25 degrees rather than 20 degrees. So we support the original.
Great, thank you. Wooddale?
No comments.
Okay, I also, for dispersion reasons, prefer the original. Fair?
Thank you. Yeah, I think the original, the 65-degree heading, keeping in mind that the steeper the turn, the wider the dispersion. I would just ask that as you get a little further in this process, you consider that departure dispersion. And what we noticed with that current 20-degree turn in the current fly quiet, the vast majority of the departures fall well short of the turn that's defined. So we're a bit concerned about overlap with that 80-degree heading, but that's something we'd really need to look at a little bit differently, including departure dispersion. So it may be a point in this discussion where the committee would want to consider a single heading once that data is in place. Thank you.
Thank you. JDA?
Thank you. Hey, so page 11 of the quarterly fly quiet report shows the departures, and they disappear at 3,000 feet. I think it is absolutely essential that this committee look at those with each of these decisions, because on this particular runway, all of the tracks disappear. In other words, are eligible to make their turns and are doing so by the east border of Park Ridge. So we really need to contain, the discussion to the most impacted communities, and JDA would defer to those communities. It sounds like Ward 39 is in full support of the original configuration. I don't think Rosemont is represented. Park Ridge is critical there, but so just a note of caution that we have visuals that can give us the flight tracks of exactly where these aircraft, and that is the full fleet, is meeting that 3,000 MSL position, and we should be using it when we make these decisions.
Okay, thank you. Ron?
Sorry, just the same comment as I had on the other runway when we're talking about dispersion and trying to spread the noise around, which was the goal of the committee. The further apart the arrows are, the better, in my opinion. So I think the original is a better option than the proposed.
Okay, thank you. In the interest of time, if you are a member who would like to have further discussion on this, including our non-voting members, please throw your hand up or make a comment. I'm not going to run through everyone since it seemed like people have thoughts that they've already expressed on this. So is there anyone who'd like to have additional discussion? Okay, seeing none, is there someone who would like to make a motion for the departure headings for this runway?
I'll make a motion that we adopt the original configurations, what is it? Can you go back to those? The week 5, 80 degree, and week 11, 65 degree.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Thank you. Is there any additional discussion? Okay, Jeanette, can we get a roll call, please?
Bensonville,
Yes.
City of Chicago 39th Ward,
Yes.
Des Plaines,
No.
Elmhurst,
Yes.
Harwood Heights,
Yes.
Park Ridge,
Yes.
Schaumburg,
Yes.
Schiller Park,
Yes.
and Wooddale.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay, thank you very much. With that, we're going to suspend our discussion on the departure headings because I don't think we can try and squeeze in a third in the next 11 minutes. And I want to give time for public comments. So just so you're all aware, we will pick up where we left off. So we will resume our next meeting with the primary runway heading discussion with the runways that we have yet to discuss. We will just continue to have this same agenda and move through it until we get through all of the items on there. So we'll use the same format next time, so you're all prepared. And with that, let's see, our next ONCC Fly Quiet meeting is June 22nd at 9:30 in the morning at Cafe La Cave in person. So get excited. So we've got a big space. We feel we can social distance, and given the changing CDC regulations, we feel really good about coming back in person. We think, you know, we like to have these conversations face to face. So I look forward to not seeing you all on Zoom. With that, I did get it's comments from the audience. I know Frank has something he would like to say.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to point out that the 41st Ward of Chicago has more population than most of the surrounding suburbs. And yet we're not getting any attention at these meetings. The 39th Ward is further away from the airport than we are. Every flight that goes over the 39th Ward originates over the 41st Ward. It's obvious that all communities are searching for less noise. I think we all agree on that. I have a couple of points. The CDA should take the lead and reduce nighttime noise by reducing nighttime flights. Everyone will benefit. The only takeaway that we're getting here, there is a big difference between what is actually happening, where the planes are at night, and where these vector headings show that they might be. I know Ryan says don't take it for gospel that that's where they're going to be, but there's a huge difference. The planes are routinely banking 90 degrees and going due north. Someone asked, where do the planes, is it Harlem Avenue, is it Cumberland? I can tell you personally, many, if not all of the planes bank north almost immediately after takeoff and head up straight through Park Ridge and straight through the 41st Ward west of Harlem Avenue. So I don't know what plan they're using right now, what Fly Quiet plan, if any. But if the final plan is going to even resemble lightly, a small resemblance to what we have now, it's going to be unacceptable. So I would please ask the committee members to remember the 41st Ward of Chicago is affected just as much, if not more so, than every other community around there. So please give us some consideration when you're making a decision. Thank you.
Thanks, Frank. I mean, I think, you know, we're all clear that this committee is made up of what are intended to be sort of geographic representatives. We all represent our own communities, but also we have to represent those communities and wards that surround us, because not everyone gets a seat at the table. And so I would encourage, as I did at the full ONCC meeting, you know, if you're a member who doesn't have a seat at the table, reach out to Fly Quiet members. Certainly we have an opportunity on the agenda, as Frank takes advantage of, to share thoughts before we get into our discussion. And so there's, you know, certainly avenues for you to get engaged in this. And I hope that and I believe that all of our committee members are considering not just our own communities, but those around us as well. And I think most of us have demonstrated that we have our overall goal of geographic dispersion of noise in mind as we consider these, even where they don't impact us directly. Are there any other public comments for today's meeting? Okay, hearing none, is there a motion to adjourn?
I'll make the motion. Second.
I'm like, everybody wants to stay on. All right, can we get a roll call, Jeanette?
Sure. Bensonville.
Yes.
City of Chicago 39th Ward.
Yes.
Des Plaines.
Yes.
Elmhurst.
Yes.
Harwood Heights.
Yes, and good job, Karen.
Thank you.
Park
Good
Ridge.
job, Karen.
Good, good.
Park Ridge.
Park Ridge is yes.
Schaumburg,
Yes.
Schiller Park,
Yes.
and Wooddale.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone.
All right. Have a great day, everyone.
Karen from Schiller Park, you did a nice job. Thank you.
Thank you.
Nice job, Karen.
Thanks, Ernie.